Every time you justify your choices, you announce weakness, invite predators, and surrender rank. Power never explains itself. It lets silence enforce obedience. You are trained to believe that explaining yourself is virtuous. That clarity equals honesty. That justification proves you are good. This belief is not moral. It is administrative. It exists to keep hierarchy stable by teaching lower-status individuals to account for themselves. Power never adopted this rule. Justification is not communication. It is compliance. It is a behavioral bow. When you explain your choices, you are not sharing logic. You are submitting your authority for external approval. You are saying, I am not sovereign over my decisions. I require validation. That signal is read instantly. Every hierarchy, corporate, social, sexual, political, runs on silent contracts. Rank is not announced, it is inferred. And the fastest way to collapse your rank is to narrate your reasoning unprompted. Predators don't need your explanation. They need confirmation that you doubt yourself. The moral lie says, if you are right, you should be able to explain yourself. Reality says, if you are powerful, you don't need to. Explanation is a defensive behavior. Defense implies threat. Threat implies vulnerability. The moment you justify, you admit that someone else has the standing to question your decisions. You have already lost ground before a word is processed. Look closely at who explains and who doesn't. Judges do not justify verdicts to defendants in real time. Generals do not debate strategy with soldiers. High-status men do not narrate their intentions. Silence is not emptiness. It is occupied territory. You were taught that silence is rude, that withholding reasons is manipulative, that transparency builds trust. These are comforting myths for those who live below the line of consequence. Above that line, transparency is a liability. Because explanation creates a handle. Once you explain, your logic can be attacked. Your motives can be reframed. Your words can be used against you. You move from actor to defendant, from chooser to pleader. The room shifts. The balance tilts. This is why institutions demand explanations from you constantly. Forms, interviews, reports, justifications. It is not for clarity. It is for control. To explain is to render yourself legible. Legibility is the enemy of autonomy. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. Power survives by being unreadable. Once intentions are known, they can be resisted. Once reasoning is exposed, it can be undermined. Mystery is not deception, it is insulation. The moral lie conditions you to self-disclose under pressure, to rush into clarification when challenged, to soothe discomfort by overspeaking. This reflex is not accidental. It is trained submission masquerading as virtue. Notice the emotional driver: fear of being misunderstood, fear of being seen as wrong, fear of rejection. These are not intellectual concerns. They are status anxieties, and every time you explain to relieve them, you confirm your inferior position. High-status individuals tolerate misunderstanding. They allow others to be confused. They do not chase alignment. They let reality adjust around them. This chapter does not ask you to become dishonest. It demands something colder. Stop confusing truth with explanation. Truth does not require narration. Decisions do not require defense. Authority does not require applause. When you act without explaining, you force others to interpret you upward. They assume depth. They assume calculation. They assume power. The absence of reasons creates gravity. This is the first rupture, the first lens shift. You are not here to be understood. You are here to operate. In the next chapter, the mechanism beneath this behavior will be dissected, how the human brain reads explanation as weakness, and why silence rewires the hierarchy without confrontation. Human beings do not primarily listen to what is said. They scan for who is above whom. Language is only the surface. Beneath it, the nervous system is ranking everyone in the room. Justification is not processed as information. It is processed as a signal. When you explain your choices, the brain does not think, "He is logical." It thinks, "He is uncertain." Explanation triggers the same neural patterns as apology, hesitation, and backtracking. It tells the listener that your internal authority is unstable. This is not cultural, it is biological. In dominance hierarchies, high-status individuals speak to direct outcomes, not to defend them. Low-status individuals speak to protect themselves from judgment. The difference is not volume or intelligence, it is orientation. One acts outward, the other reacts inward. The moment you justify, you switch from actor to respondent. Respondents do not lead, they adapt. Your explanation gives the listener a lever. Even if they say nothing, their brain stores your reasons as variables that can be challenged later. You have exposed the wiring. Once exposed, it can be cut. This is why powerful figures use statements, not reasons. "I've decided. This is the direction. It's handled." These phrases are not vague by accident. Vagueness is strategic. It denies the listener an entry point. The brain cannot argue with what it cannot dissect, so it submits. Justification, by contrast, invites negotiation. It opens a loop. The listener unconsciously thinks, if he's explaining, this decision is still open. You may believe you are clarifying. They believe you are persuadable. And persuadable equals weak. Silence creates asymmetry. Asymmetry creates dominance. When you refuse to explain, the burden shifts. The other person must now guess your reasoning. Guessing places them below you. They are working. You are still. This is why interrogators talk and leaders pause. Why subordinates overcommunicate and commanders undercommunicate. The hierarchy is enforced through cognitive load. Whoever carries it loses. There is another layer: scarcity. Words dilute authority. The more reasons you give, the cheaper your decision becomes. It starts to look like a product being sold rather than an outcome being imposed. Power does not sell itself. It selects. Notice how predators behave. A lion does not justify the hunt. A rival does not explain the takeover. Nature does not argue. It moves. Your instinct to explain is a survival reflex from childhood. As a child, explanation was protection. It reduced punishment. It gained forgiveness. But adult hierarchies punish that same reflex. What once preserved you now exposes you. Most men never update this behavior. They walk into adult power structures using child strategies. They talk when they should withhold. They defend when they should stand still. They bleed status without realizing it. This is why justification feels right but produces worse outcomes. Your nervous system is seeking safety. The hierarchy is seeking strength. Silence is not passive. It is an aggressive act of withholding validation. It forces others to regulate themselves. That discomfort they feel, that is the power shift. You are not being unclear. You are being unmovable. In the next chapter, you will see how this plays out in real people, distinct archetypes that dominate or collapse based on their relationship with explanation. Once you see them, you won't unsee them. Every hierarchy divides cleanly into two archetypes, not by intelligence, not by morality, by behavior. The explainers and the deciders. You can identify them in minutes. The explainer speaks in paragraphs. He anticipates objections before they're voiced. He fills silence with context, reasoning, and reassurance. His language is padded. His tone seeks alignment. He wants to be understood. The decider speaks in outcomes. He uses short statements. He allows pauses. He does not chase agreement. He wants movement, not consensus. The room always follows the decider. This is not charisma. It is structure. The explainer positions himself beneath the listener by offering his reasoning as a negotiable object. The decider positions himself above the listener by treating his decision as a fixed point. The explainer says, "Here, why I chose this." The decider says, "This is what's happening. Same content, opposite rank. The explainer believes he is being cooperative. He is actually advertising uncertainty. His preemptive clarifications reveal fear. Fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of being seen as wrong. Those fears leak through tone, timing, and excess detail. The decider does not resolve tension, he creates it, and tension bends environments. Watch meetings, negotiations, relationships. The explainer justifies schedule changes, boundaries, decisions. The decider announces them. One asks permission without saying so. The other assumes authority until challenged. And challenges are rare. Because challenging a decider carries risk. Challenging an explainer carries reward. The explainer has already shown he will engage, debate, soften. The decider has shown nothing. Power prefers uncertainty over clarity. There is a reason high-ranking figures often seem cold, even blunt. It is not a personality flaw. It is a defense mechanism. Emotional distance preserves hierarchy. Warmth invites intrusion. The explainer invites questions. The decider invites compliance. This pattern repeats everywhere. In dating, the explainer overcommunicates intentions, explains boundaries, justifies needs. He tries to be fair. He becomes predictable. Predictability kills desire. The decider states availability, sets terms, withholds rationale. He is not cruel, he is opaque. Opacity creates gravity. In work, the explainer sends long messages defending decisions. The decider sends one line and moves on. When resistance appears, the explainer negotiates. The decider observes. Observation is power. Reaction is weakness. Most men sit permanently in the explainer archetype because it feels moral. It feels civilized. It feels safe. But hierarchies are not moral systems. They are selection systems. They reward those who generate certainty, not those who offer comfort. You do not rise by being reasonable. You rise by being final. This chapter is not telling you to become loud or aggressive. That is still reactive. True deciders are calm, minimal, almost indifferent. Their restraint is what terrifies. They do not explain because they do not need buy-in. They already assume it. Once you see these archetypes, you'll recognize them instantly. And you'll notice something uncomfortable. The explainers resent the deciders, but they still obey them. In the next chapter, this resentment becomes dangerous. History, power struggles, and human nature will show you exactly how explanation is punished, not rewarded, once stakes increase. History is not kind to those who explain themselves. Not because explanation is immoral, but because it creates openings, and power always exploits openings. When stakes rise, clarity stops being a virtue and becomes a weakness others learn to weaponize. Every collapse begins with overexposure. Political leaders fall not when they make decisions, but when they justify them too much. Each explanation becomes a new angle of attack. Each clarification invites reinterpretation. Rivals don't need to defeat the decision. They dismantle the reasoning behind it. Once reasoning is public, loyalty fractures. Machiavelli observed this pattern repeatedly. Princes who revealed motives were constrained by them. Those who stayed unreadable stayed in control. The public does not punish secrecy. It punishes vulnerability disguised as honesty. Transparency feels noble until someone sharper uses it against you. Look at interrogations. The guilty over-explain. The powerful withhold. Interrogators are trained to provoke justification because it creates contradictions. Contradictions erode authority. Authority, once eroded, cannot be rebuilt with more words. Words compound the damage. In war, strategies are concealed not only from enemies but from allies, because even allies leak. Because human nature cannot resist interpretation, gossip, and misalignment. The more people understand your plan, the more versions of it exist, and the weaker it becomes. This applies to your life. When you explain your boundaries, they get negotiated. When you explain your ambitions, they get diluted. When you explain your decisions, they get delayed. Power systems reward those who move first and clarify later, if at all. The modern world preaches radical transparency. It sells it as progress. In reality, it creates compliance. A transparent man is trackable, predictable, manageable. His motives are mapped. His reactions are anticipated. An opaque man is dangerous. This is why institutions demand visibility from you while reserving secrecy for themselves. Surveillance flows downward. Obscurity flows upward. The rule is ancient and deliberate. You were told that explaining builds trust. That is half true at low levels. Among equals, explanation lubricates cooperation. But once hierarchy appears, explanation becomes leverage. Trust is not the currency of power. Control is. Human nature seeks certainty. When you explain, you give certainty. When you withhold, you create tension. Tension forces others to orient around you. They watch, they wait, they adjust. This is not cruelty, it is mechanics. The men who lose in power games are not stupid. They are transparent. They reveal intentions early. They narrate plans. They defend themselves emotionally. And then they are outmaneuvered by quieter men who say less and move faster. The deeper threat is this. Once you are known, you are no longer feared. And without fear, subtle, unspoken fear, authority evaporates. This chapter is meant to strip away the fantasy that being open protects you. It does the opposite when stakes rise. Power punishes those who explain because explanation hands over the map. In the next chapter, the shift happens. Not philosophically, but tactically. You will be shown how to withhold without escalating conflict, how to move without justification, and how silence becomes a weapon rather than a void. Silence is not a personality trait. It is a trained behavior. And like any discipline, it feels unnatural at first because it cuts against your conditioning. You were trained to fill gaps. When tension appears, you speak. When questioned, you clarify. When misunderstood, you correct. This reflex makes you predictable. Predictability makes you manageable. Withholding is the opposite reflex. It is the decision to let discomfort exist without neutralizing it. Most men cannot do this. They panic internally and talk themselves back into submission. The discipline begins with restraint, not strategy. You do not withhold to manipulate. You withhold to preserve authority. The moment you start using silence emotionally, you give it away. Real withholding is cold, almost bored. The first rule: stop preemptive explanation. Do not explain before you are challenged. Do not justify to avoid confusion. Confusion is not your enemy. Confusion keeps others cautious. When people are unsure, they tread lightly. The second rule: answer outcomes, not reasoning. If asked why, respond with what. If pressed for logic, restate the decision. If cornered, pause. Pauses do more work than arguments. A pause signals that you are not rushed, not threatened, not seeking approval. It reverses the pressure. The other person now feels exposed for needing more. The third rule: tolerate misinterpretation. This is where most men fail. They cannot stand being seen inaccurately. They rush to fix the image. This urge is rooted in insecurity, not integrity. Power allows itself to be misunderstood. Misinterpretation filters weak challengers. Those who act on assumptions reveal themselves. You gain information without revealing anything. Withholding does not mean never speaking. It means speaking last and only when speech advances position. Words become tools, not habits. Notice the shift. You are no longer reacting to questions. Questions now orbit you. In negotiations, this discipline changes everything. The man who explains loses leverage. The man who withholds sets terms by default. The other side fills the silence with concessions. In relationships, the same law applies. Overcommunication signals need. Need collapses polarity. Withholding restores asymmetry. Asymmetry fuels desire and respect. This is not cruelty. It is boundary enforcement without friction. You will feel internal resistance, anxiety, the fear that silence makes you look guilty, rude, arrogant. That fear is the residue of low-status conditioning. It is the voice that kept you safe when you had no leverage. Now it costs you leverage. Withholding trains others to approach you carefully. They start to prepare before speaking. They choose words more precisely. They project intent onto you instead of extracting it. That projection works in your favor. The discipline must be consistent. One explanation collapses 10 silences. Once you justify, people expect it again. Authority, once leaked, is difficult to reseal. This chapter arms you with a behavior shift, but it is not complete until the internal identity changes. As long as part of you wants to be approved of, you will eventually explain. The next chapter is the execution, the death of the apologetic self, the replacement of a man who needs to be understood with a man who expects to be obeyed. The final barrier is not technique, it is identity. You can practice silence, pauses, minimal speech, but if the old self remains, it will surface under pressure. When stakes rise, identity takes control, and the identity you were given was designed for permission, not sovereignty. The apologetic self was useful once. It kept you safe. It reduced conflict. It helped you survive environments where you had no power. But survival identities become liabilities when you step into arenas where power is contested. This self believes something dangerous, that being accepted is safer than being feared. So it explains. It softens. It clarifies. It seeks alignment. And every time it does, it trades authority for relief. This chapter is not about improvement, it is about execution. That version of you cannot coexist with power. One must die. The apologetic self is emotionally loud. It reacts quickly. It hates ambiguity. It feels responsible for other people's comfort. These traits are praised socially because they make you controllable. Sovereign identities are the opposite. They are slow. They are minimal. They do not manage emotions that are not theirs. They do not chase understanding. A sovereign man does not feel guilty for withholding. He feels nothing at all. Silence is not a tactic. It is his default state. This requires a brutal reframe. You are not here to be liked. You are not here to be understood. You are here to operate without interference. Once this clicks, the behavior stabilizes. Challenges stop triggering explanation. Accusations stop triggering defense. Misunderstandings stop triggering correction. The world adjusts instead of you. This is where most men break. The loss of approval feels like death because approval once equaled safety. Let it die anyway. Safety is no longer your objective. Control is. When the apologetic self dissolves, something unsettling replaces it. Calm, not confidence. Calm, the absence of urgency, the absence of self-narration. You no longer justify because there is nothing to justify. Decisions emerge, and reality absorbs them. This is the moment hierarchies flip. People begin to speak differently around you. They prepare more, they ask less, they infer more. They project authority onto you because you refuse to perform it. This is the final installation. There is no Chapter 7 comfort, no call to community, no reassurance. The warning is implicit. If you continue to explain yourself, you will continue to be managed. Silence is not empty. It is occupied by power. No announcement is coming. No signal will warn you that you've been ranked, filtered, and placed beneath others. Selection does not ask permission. It observes behavior and decides quietly. An explanation is one of the strongest disqualifiers. Every time you justify yourself, you mark yourself as manageable, as someone who can be pressured into compliance, as someone whose decisions are open to review. You are not rejected loudly. You are simply bypassed. Opportunities stop reaching you. Influence roots around you. Authority moves elsewhere. This is how power eliminates without conflict. You were told that silence would isolate you. The opposite is true. Silence isolates others from accessing you. It creates a perimeter. Only those with leverage cross it. This is the final warning. There is no neutral ground anymore. The modern environment is saturated with noise, explanation, self-disclosure, confession. Men narrate their thoughts constantly, believing visibility equals relevance. In reality, visibility makes them predictable. Predictable men are easy to outmaneuver. Those who rise are not louder, they are harder to read. Selection favors men who create friction, who slow interactions, who refuse to be rushed into clarity. These men are not aggressive, they are uncooperative with weakness. If you continue explaining, you will be selected against. Not because you are wrong, not because you lack intelligence, but because your behavior signals dependence on approval. Power has no use for that. This chapter is not a call to action. It is a line in the sand. On one side are men who still believe words will save them. On the other are men who let outcomes speak and silence enforce rank. There is no community promised here, no belonging, no comfort, only a narrowing. As you withhold, fewer people will feel entitled to you. As you speak less, more weight will be assigned to what remains. As you stop justifying, resistance will either harden or disappear entirely. Both outcomes are acceptable. The world does not reward those who explain their worth. It rewards those who assume it and move accordingly. Selection is ongoing. The filter is behavioral, and silence is the gate.